Ever wonder what skills we've lost to time? Have you considered how our ancestors created masterpieces without modern technology? Could these forgotten crafts solve modern problems? Number 10. Stained glass artistry. Did you know that medieval stained glass makers created vibrant colors we still struggle to replicate today? The ruby reds and sapphire blues that illuminate cathedral windows contain secrets that modern craftspeople are just beginning to rediscover. Medieval glass artists didn't just make pretty windows, they created immersive storytelling experiences for a largely illiterate population. Their glass was thicker, more textured, and captured light in ways our machine-made glass simply cannot. The process began with gathering sand, ash, and other materials, melting them in wood-fired furnaces reaching over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Imagine working in those conditions without temperature controls or safety gear. The molten glass was then blown, flattened, cut, and painted with special metal oxides that permanently fused with the glass during firing. The medieval palette was limited but powerful: cobalt for blues, copper for greens and reds, gold for yellows and ambers. What makes this craft particularly special is the community aspect. A stained glass workshop employed designers, glassblowers, cutters, painters, and lead workers, creating meaningful employment for entire towns. The finished windows weren't just art, they were educational tools, telling biblical stories and depicting local history for people who couldn't read. Today's architectural glass is largely mass-produced, lacking the character, durability, and sustainability of medieval methods. Modern stained glass artists typically use pre-made sheet glass rather than creating their own, missing the opportunity to develop truly unique formulas and textures. Yet interest is growing. Small workshops in France, England, and the United States are researching medieval glass recipes, trying to recapture the luminous quality that makes 800-year-old windows still dazzle visitors today. With growing interest in sustainable building materials and natural lighting, could a revival of medieval glass techniques create both beauty and practical solutions for contemporary spaces? The medieval glass makers knew something we've forgotten: how to create lasting beauty from simple materials that improves with age rather than deteriorating. Number 9. Illuminated manuscript production. Have you ever seen a medieval book page so vibrant it seems to glow from within? Before printing presses, books were handcrafted treasures requiring teams of specialized artisans. The term illumination comes from the Latin illuminare, meaning to light up, which these radiant pages literally did with gold leaf and brilliant pigments. Creating an illuminated manuscript wasn't just about beautiful decoration, it was a spiritual practice for many monks and a prestigious commission for secular workshops. The parchment alone represented an enormous investment. Each book required dozens of animal skins, typically sheep, goat, or calf, carefully stretched, scraped, and smoothed over weeks. A single Bible might need 200 calf skins, representing an entire herd. The pigments came from surprisingly exotic sources. Ultramarine blue, often used for the Virgin Mary's robes, cost more than gold because it was made from lapis lazuli mined in Afghanistan. Vermilion red came from cinnabar mined in Spain. Green might be made from malachite, while yellow could come from saffron flowers or toxic orpiment. Scribes and painters made their own inks and paints, mixing these precious materials with egg whites or gum arabic. Gold leaf application was perhaps the most technically challenging aspect. Impossibly thin sheets of gold were applied to surfaces prepared with a special clay base called gesso, then burnished with a smooth stone until they shone like mirrors. The gold wasn't simply decorative, it reflected candlelight, making the pages legible in dimly lit churches and monasteries. The actual writing was done with careful precision using quill pens cut from goose, swan, or crow feathers. Different feathers from different birds created different line weights, and scribes would maintain dozens of carefully prepared quills. They worked in scriptoria, special rooms dedicated to this purpose, often in cold conditions since fire posed an obvious threat to parchment and books. Today, most of these techniques survive only among a handful of specialty artists. Mass production eliminated the need for handwritten books, and synthetic pigments replaced natural ones. Yet the aesthetic influence of illuminated manuscripts remains strong in graphic design, fantasy illustration, and even digital media. Some contemporary artists are rediscovering these techniques, finding that slow, methodical crafting offers a meditative counterbalance to our fast-paced digital world. Could reviving this craft provide not just beautiful objects, but also a more mindful approach to communication and knowledge preservation? Number 8. Stonemasonry and cathedral building. How did medieval builders create soaring cathedrals with basic tools and no computers? The medieval mason knew something we've nearly forgotten: how to read stone, understanding its internal structure, grain, and behavior over time. Medieval stone masonry wasn't just a job, it was a carefully guarded tradition passed through generations in guild systems. Apprentices spent years learning to select, cut, and carve stone before they could become journeymen, and many years more before becoming master masons. They created buildings designed to last centuries, and they succeeded, considering how many medieval structures still stand today. What's truly remarkable is how masons solved complex engineering problems without modern mathematics or computer modeling. They used sophisticated but low-tech methods like ropes, templates, and geometric principles to create perfectly balanced structures. The flying buttress, that iconic external arch that supports cathedral walls, represents medieval engineering genius, transferring the weight of massive stone ceilings outward rather than downward. The tools were simple but required incredible skill. Masons used mallets and chisels, measuring rods, squares, compasses, and plumb lines. They could split enormous stones using only wooden wedges soaked in water. The expansion of the wood would create enough pressure to crack the stone along natural fault lines, a technique that required intimate knowledge of each stone's properties. Cathedral building was also a community endeavor. Historical records show entire towns contributing to construction, with specialized workers developing distinct roles. Some quarried stone, others carved decorative elements, while master masons oversaw the overall design and engineering. Many cathedrals took over 100 years to complete, meaning generations of craftspeople devoted their lives to buildings they would never see finished. Modern masonry relies heavily on power tools, pre-cut stone, and concrete. Few contemporary masons have experience with the traditional techniques that created buildings capable of standing for a millennium or more. Yet increasing interest in sustainable building practices is sparking renewed appreciation for these methods. Organizations like the Stone Foundation in New Mexico and traditional building programs in Europe are teaching historical stone masonry to a new generation. Could reviving these techniques help us create more sustainable, longer-lasting buildings? Unlike concrete, which has a high carbon footprint and relatively short lifespan, stone structures can stand for centuries with minimal maintenance. Perhaps the medieval mason's patient approach to building could teach us something valuable about creating architecture meant to outlast its creators. Number 7. Natural dyeing and pigment making. Did you know that the vibrant colors in medieval tapestries were all created from plants, insects, minerals, and even mollusks? Before synthetic dyes revolutionized textile production in the 1850s, creating color was a complex craft combining chemistry, botany, and artistry. Medieval dyers were essentially practical chemists, understanding how to extract color from natural substances and make it permanent on fibers. The famous Bayeux blue came from woad plants, requiring a fermentation process that produced a terrible smell, so bad that dyers were often required to work outside city limits. The most prized red came from tiny insects called kermes that lived on oak trees around the Mediterranean. It took 70,000 insects to produce 1 pound of dye, which explains why bright red clothing was reserved for the wealthy and powerful. The dyeing process itself was labor-intensive and time-consuming. Many dyes required mordants, metallic salts that helped the color bond permanently to the fibers. Alum was the most common mordant, often imported from the Middle East at great expense. Different mordants could produce different colors from the same dyestuff. For example, madder root could create colors ranging from salmon pink to deep burgundy depending on the mordants and after-treatments used. Pigments for painting followed similar principles but were prepared differently. Minerals were ground into fine powder and mixed with binders like egg yolk for tempera painting or oils. The grinding process was crucial. Too coarse and the paint would be gritty, too fine, and some minerals would lose their color intensity. Apprentices might spend days grinding pigments on marble slabs using stone mullers. What's particularly striking about medieval color production was its sustainability. Most materials were renewable plant matter or abundant minerals. The processes, while labor-intensive, used minimal energy and produced biodegradable waste. Compare this to modern synthetic dye production, which often involves petroleum products and creates toxic runoff. Today, there's growing interest in natural dyes as people become more conscious of the environmental impact of textile production. Craft dyers are rediscovering traditional recipes, sometimes with modern adaptations. Indigo vats no longer need to smell terrible, thanks to better understanding of the chemistry involved. Artists are growing dye gardens and foraging for color sources in their local environments, creating a new regional color palette. Could returning to these methods help address the fashion industry's massive pollution problem? While natural dyeing can't match the scale of industrial production, it offers a model for more sustainable color creation. Perhaps we don't need to completely abandon modern methods, but we could certainly learn from the medieval dyers' intimate knowledge of materials and processes that worked with nature rather than against it. Number 6. Blacksmithing and Damascus steel production. Have you heard about the legendary Damascus steel that could supposedly cut through other swords while remaining sharp enough to slice a floating silk scarf? Medieval blacksmiths created metal masterpieces we still can't fully replicate today, despite our advanced technology. Medieval smiths worked without thermometers, relying instead on the color of heated metal to judge its temperature: bright yellow for forge welding, cherry red for shaping. They created their own tools, managed temperamental charcoal fires, and understood metal properties through years of hands-on experience rather than metallurgy textbooks. Damascus steel represents perhaps the most mysterious lost knowledge in metalworking. Original Damascus, also called wootz steel, was produced in India and the Middle East, featuring distinctive watery patterns and properties that seemed almost magical for the time: exceptional hardness combined with flexibility, and an edge that remained sharp through intense use. The exact process was lost around the 18th century, and while modern metallurgists have created similar-looking products, they haven't perfectly replicated the original. Swords weren't the only impressive medieval metal products. Blacksmiths created intricate locks with complex internal mechanisms, surgical tools that remained in use for centuries, and architectural elements like hinges and gates that have withstood hundreds of years of use and weather. They did this all without power tools, using only hammer, anvil, fire, and various hand tools they forged themselves. The blacksmith's craft was about more than technical skill, it was about relationship with materials. They understood how metal wanted to move, how it would behave under different conditions, and how to work with rather than against these properties. They practiced sustainable recycling out of necessity, reusing every scrap and filing because metal was precious and labor-intensive to produce. Today's resurgence in blacksmithing focuses largely on decorative ironwork, bladesmithing, and historical reproduction. Modern smiths have the advantage of electric forges, gas torches, power hammers, and scientific understanding of metallurgy, yet many are deliberately returning to traditional methods. They're rediscovering the meditative quality of hammer rhythms and the satisfaction of creating long-lasting objects with minimal technology. From an environmental perspective, traditional blacksmithing offers advantages over industrial metal production. Small-scale forging uses significantly less energy than factory processes, particularly when using efficient forge designs and focusing on minimal waste approaches. The resulting products typically last generations rather than seasons, representing a more sustainable approach to metal goods. Could reviving traditional ironwork skills help create more sustainable, longer-lasting metal products in our throwaway culture? Might we find that the slow, deliberate work of the forge offers psychological benefits in our hyper-paced digital world? Number 5. Medieval brewing and fermentation. Ever wonder why everyone drank beer in the Middle Ages, including children? Was it just for the buzz, or was something else happening? Medieval brewing wasn't just about creating alcohol, it was about preserving nutrients and creating safe hydration options when water sources were often contaminated. Medieval brewers and fermenters were scientists before science was formalized. They understood microbial processes without microscopes, creating techniques to harness beneficial bacteria and yeasts while suppressing harmful ones. Their knowledge was passed through generations in guilds and family traditions, with women often leading brewing operations until the commercial scale-up in later periods pushed them out of the profession. Beer in the medieval period bore little resemblance to today's clear golden beverages. It was often thick, nutritious, and filled with herbs and spices rather than just hops. Gruit, a mixture of herbs like yarrow, bog myrtle, and wild rosemary, was commonly used for flavoring and preservation before hops became the standard. Different regions had distinctive brewing traditions based on available ingredients and local taste preferences. The equipment was equally distinctive. Instead of stainless steel, medieval brewers used wooden vessels, clay amphorae, and leather containers. They maintained brewing sticks that carried their unique yeast cultures from batch to batch, an early version of what we now call starter cultures. Fermentation was wild and unpredictable by modern standards, creating complex flavor profiles that commercial yeasts rarely achieve. Brewing was just one facet of medieval fermentation mastery. Mead fermented honey, perry fermented pears, and countless regional fruit wines were dietary staples. Fermented foods like sauerkraut, pickles, and cheese were essential preservation techniques in an era without refrigeration. Every household would have had multiple fermentation projects bubbling away at any given time. What made these practices particularly valuable was their adaptability to local conditions. Brewers and fermenters worked with what was available seasonally, creating preservation systems that extended the usable life of harvest bounty. This required intimate knowledge of local plants, growing conditions, and seasonal patterns, a holistic approach we might call early food systems thinking. Today's craft brewing renaissance has sparked interest in historical recipes and techniques. Breweries like Dogfish Head and Williams Brothers have recreated ancient and medieval styles, often discovering that these primitive beverages offer complex flavors that appeal to modern palates. Home fermentation has also experienced explosive growth, with people rediscovering the satisfaction of transforming simple ingredients into nutritious, living foods. From a health perspective, we're just beginning to understand what medieval people intuitively knew: fermented foods and beverages offer probiotic benefits and enhanced nutrition. Modern research into the microbiome suggests that traditional fermentation practices may have helped balance gut health in ways that our sterile modern diet often fails to do. Could reviving medieval fermentation techniques help address modern health issues and food waste problems? Might traditional preservation methods offer more sustainable alternatives to energy-intensive refrigeration and processing? Perhaps the medieval brewer still has lessons for our modern food system. Number 4. Manuscript illumination and calligraphy. Can you imagine spending years writing a single book? Could the slow, meditative process of handwriting and decorating text change our relationship with information? Medieval scribes and illuminators created books that were as much art as information, investing each page with attention that's almost unimaginable in our fast-paced digital world. Calligraphy, the art of beautiful writing, wasn't just about aesthetics in medieval times. Different script styles conveyed different levels of importance and served specific purposes. Gothic textura was used for luxury Bibles and important texts, while quicker cursive scripts were employed for everyday documents. Scribes trained for years to achieve consistency, developing specialized muscles and techniques that allowed them to write for hours without fatigue. The tools seemed simple but required expertise to use effectively. Quill pens cut from goose, swan, or crow feathers had different properties and were shaped according to the script being written. Ink was homemade, usually from oak galls combined with iron sulfate, producing a deep black that has remained legible for centuries. Scribes worked on prepared animal skin parchment or vellum, which provided a smooth writing surface that paper couldn't match for durability. Illumination elevated these texts from merely functional to extraordinary. Gold leaf, brilliant pigments, and intricate designs transformed words into visual experiences. Illuminators began with sketching designs in light lead or ink, then applied areas of gold leaf, followed by painting in colors from most brilliant to most subtle. The finest details might be added with brushes containing just a few hairs. What's particularly fascinating about medieval book production was its collaborative nature. A single manuscript might pass through many hands: the parchment maker, the scribe for main text, a rubricator for red headings, illuminators for decorations and illustrations, and finally a binder to assemble and protect the finished pages. Each specialist contributed their expertise to create a unified whole. Today's digital communication seems nearly opposite to these handcrafted texts. We value speed over permanence, quantity over quality, and accessibility over preciousness. Yet interest in calligraphy and hand lettering has grown significantly in recent years, perhaps as a counterbalance to our screen-dominated lives. Modern calligraphers are studying historical manuscripts, rediscovering techniques, and adapting them for contemporary materials and purposes. Traditional parchment preparation remains extremely rare, with only a handful of artisans worldwide still practicing this craft. Similarly, gold leaf application techniques and natural pigment preparation have few serious practitioners. Yet these skills represent a direct connection to medieval visual culture and book production methods that shaped Western civilization for centuries. The slow, deliberate practice of traditional calligraphy and illumination offers more than just beautiful results. It provides a different relationship with text and information. The physical embodiment of words through handwriting engages different cognitive processes than typing. Studies suggest handwriting improves memory retention and conceptual understanding in ways that keyboarding doesn't. Could returning to some aspects of handwritten communication help us process information more deeply? Might the patience required for manuscript production teach valuable lessons about quality over quantity in our communication? What would happen if we treated some of our words as worthy of the time and materials invested in medieval manuscripts? Number 3. Traditional beekeeping and skep making. Did you know that medieval beekeepers could communicate with their bees? That's what they believed anyway, maintaining that bees needed to be told about major family events like births, marriages, and deaths, or they might abandon their hives in protest. This practice, called telling the bees, reflects the intimate relationship between keepers and their insects in traditional beekeeping. Medieval beekeeping looked nothing like today's neat rows of boxed hives. Instead, beekeepers used skeps, domed baskets woven from straw or reeds, to house their colonies. Creating these skeps was a specialized craft involving careful selection of materials, usually rye straw because of its length and durability, and precise quilling techniques. A good skep maker could create hives that lasted for decades despite being made from what seems like fragile material. The relationship between keeper and bees was far more hands-off than modern methods. Without removable frames or observation windows, medieval beekeepers relied on listening to the hive, observing flight patterns and other external signs to understand colony health. They worked with the bees' natural behaviors rather than imposing rigid management systems. Swarming, when part of the colony leaves with a new queen, was seen as a natural and desirable process rather than something to be prevented. Honey harvesting reflected this partnership approach. Instead of extracting all honey, medieval beekeepers typically took only the excess, leaving plenty for the bees to survive winter. Some practices included tanging, where keepers would bang metal implements when a swarm emerged, supposedly encouraging the bees to land nearby rather than traveling far. Modern science suggests the bees weren't actually responding to the sound, but the practice helped beekeepers track swarms by alerting neighbors to watch for them. The products of the hive were valued far beyond what we typically appreciate today. Honey wasn't just a sweetener, it was medicine, preservative, and fermentation base for mead. Beeswax was essential for candles, particularly church candles that required pure wax rather than tallow. Propolis and even bee venom were used medicinally. Nothing from the hive was wasted. Traditional skep beekeeping declined sharply after the development of movable frame hives in the 19th century. Modern commercial beekeeping, with its migratory pollination services, mechanized honey extraction, and treatment-dependent management, bears little resemblance to the medieval approach. Yet some aspects are experiencing revival, particularly among hobbyists interested in more natural beekeeping methods. What's particularly interesting about traditional beekeeping is how it represents a different relationship with nature, one based on cooperation rather than control. Medieval beekeepers didn't try to stop swarming or replace queens on a fixed schedule. They didn't treat against diseases and pests because many modern bee problems simply didn't exist yet. They observed, adapted, and worked within natural systems rather than attempting to override them. Could reviving aspects of traditional beekeeping help address colony collapse and other bee health issues? Some natural beekeeping advocates believe so, arguing that modern intensive management stresses colonies and prevents natural selection from producing hardier bees. While few advocate returning entirely to skep beekeeping, which doesn't allow hive inspection without destruction, many are adopting its minimally invasive principles. The craft of skep making itself is now extremely rare, practiced by perhaps a few dozen people worldwide. Yet interest is growing as people recognize the historical importance of these handcrafted hives and the different beekeeping philosophy they represent. Could our struggling bee populations benefit from the wisdom embedded in these ancient practices? Number 2, herbalism and natural medicine. How did people survive before modern medicine? Was medieval healthcare really just superstition and bloodletting? While medieval medicine certainly included practices we now consider ineffective or harmful, it also contained sophisticated plant-based treatments developed through centuries of observation and experience, some of which modern science is now validating. Medieval herbalism wasn't just random plant experimentation. It was a structured system combining Greek humoral theory, practical observation, and local plant knowledge. Monastery gardens cultivated hundreds of medicinal plants, carefully organized according to their properties and uses. Monastic hospitals developed extensive treatment protocols using these herbs, many recorded in texts that survive today. The preparation methods were complex and specific. Certain plants were harvested only during particular moon phases or seasons when their medicinal compounds were at peak potency. Processing techniques included infusions, decoctions, tinctures, oils, salves, and poultices, each extracting different properties from the plants. Some preparations required fermentation or aging for months or years to develop full efficacy. Herbal practitioners weren't just collecting random folklore, they were systematically documenting effects, contraindications, and specific applications. Works like Hildegard of Bingen's Physica and the Leech Book of Bald contain detailed information about hundreds of medicinal plants and their uses. These texts often combined practical treatment information with theological or philosophical frameworks that gave meaning to healing practices. What's particularly interesting is how some medieval remedies are being validated by modern research. A recreation of a 10th century Anglo-Saxon eye salve recipe was found to be effective against MRSA in laboratory tests. Willow bark, long used for pain and fever, contains salicylic compounds, the basis for aspirin. Plants like foxglove containing digitalis, used for heart conditions, and periwinkle containing vincristine, used in chemotherapy, have become essential modern medicines. The medieval approach to health differed fundamentally from our modern disease-focused model. Herbalists emphasized prevention, balance, and supporting the body's natural healing processes rather than attacking specific pathogens. Seasonal adjustments to diet and lifestyle were considered essential preventive medicine. This holistic approach recognized connections between physical, emotional, and spiritual health long before psychosomatic medicine became scientifically accepted. Today, interest in traditional herbal medicine has grown tremendously, though often disconnected from its historical roots. Modern herbalism sometimes cherry-picks practices without understanding the underlying systems. Yet serious herb schools are increasingly incorporating historical studies, recognizing that centuries of documented experience offer valuable insights that complement modern research. What's been largely lost is the self-sufficient nature of traditional healthcare. Medieval communities produced most of their own medicines locally, using plants grown or gathered in their immediate environment. This created resilient healthcare systems less dependent on complex supply chains. The knowledge was widely distributed rather than concentrated among specialists, with many households maintaining their own herb gardens and basic treatment skills. Could reviving aspects of traditional herbalism help address modern healthcare challenges? While few would suggest replacing modern medicine with medieval practices, the traditional emphasis on prevention, whole-person treatment, and leveraging local plant resources offers valuable complements to our technology-intensive approach. As antibiotic resistance grows and pharmaceutical costs soar, could old remedies offer new solutions? Number 1. Natural building and timber framing. What if our homes could last 500 years instead of 50? Could buildings actually get better with age rather than deteriorating? Medieval builders created structures that have stood for centuries using only local, natural materials and human-powered tools, a stark contrast to today's energy-intensive construction methods and relatively short building lifespans. Timber framing, the art of creating buildings with large wooden beams joined by precisely fitted connections, was the backbone of medieval construction throughout wooded regions of Europe. Master carpenters could read trees, understanding how each log would behave based on how it grew, selecting specific trees for specific building elements. They worked with the wood's natural properties rather than fighting against them. The joinery systems they developed were engineering marvels that required no nails or metal fasteners. Mortise and tenon joints, dovetails, scarf joints, and various locking systems created solid connections that could flex slightly with seasonal changes without losing structural integrity. Each joint was custom-fitted using hand tools, axes, adzes, chisels, and handsaws, requiring tremendous skill and knowledge of wood properties. What made these buildings particularly remarkable was their adaptability. When parts eventually wore out, typically after several hundred years, they could be selectively replaced without demolishing the entire structure. The building systems were designed with repair and modification in mind, creating structures that evolved with changing needs rather than being discarded. The materials themselves came from the immediate environment: local timber, stone, clay, lime, and straw. This wasn't just about convenience, it meant buildings naturally harmonized with local climate conditions. Oak-framed buildings in England, stone houses in central France, and half-timbered structures in Germany each represented adapted solutions to specific regional conditions, developed through generations of observation and refinement. Until relatively recently, builders learned through direct apprenticeship rather than formal education. Young carpenters spent years working alongside masters, absorbing not just techniques but also the underlying principles and material knowledge. They learned to solve problems with available resources rather than standardized parts, creating buildings that were by necessity unique to their place and time. Modern construction, by contrast, prioritizes speed and initial cost efficiency over longevity. The typical American home is designed to last about 50 years, while commercial buildings may be demolished after just 30 years. We build with the assumption of obsolescence rather than adaptation, creating a constant cycle of demolition and rebuilding that consumes enormous resources. Today's natural building revival incorporates timber framing alongside other traditional techniques like cob, a mixture of clay, sand, and straw, rammed earth, and stone masonry. Organizations like the Timber Framers Guild teach traditional joinery through hands-on workshops. Structural engineers are rediscovering the principles behind these time-tested building systems, sometimes finding that traditional solutions outperform modern alternatives in sustainability metrics. What's particularly relevant about these building methods is their low carbon footprint. Wood, properly harvested, is a renewable resource that sequesters carbon. Clay, lime, straw, and stone require minimal processing energy compared to cement, steel, and synthetic materials. The resulting buildings offer excellent thermal performance with proper design, reducing energy needs throughout the structure's life. Could returning to these building principles help address our climate and housing challenges? While few advocates suggest abandoning all modern building technology, traditional methods offer tested alternatives to some of our most environmentally problematic construction practices. And in a world where housing affordability is an increasing concern, could building simpler, more durable structures with local materials offer part of the solution? Is it possible our ancestors knew something about creating lasting beauty that we've forgotten in our rush toward technological solutions? Could the revival of these medieval crafts offer not just interesting hobbies but practical approaches to modern challenges?